John, this is syndicated though, isn't it? I mean, like one thing reflects a much broader audience, am I right? I mean, it's been broadcast through the churches, etc.
Yeah. And plus we'll record and reflight and put it on YouTube so everyone can get hold of it.
Yeah.
Also, it's broadcasted through the other Facebooks and that, correct?
Yeah, everything, yeah.
We can see them.
Guys, just tell me when you want me to start with the video.
Craig, maybe give it another minute.
Give it 1 or 2 minutes, yeah.
Yeah.
Minister, before we start, we're going to have to improve the gender equality. I'm just having a look. Next time you speak, I think there'll be an improved. We'll have to be 50% at least.
Or 50+1, it will be quite interesting.
Minister, you know the only thing you have to do tonight, you have to disclose which football team you support. You are aware of it. Got to be full disclosure.
If there is still one that I'm supporting.
So have a look on the call and before you decide the disclosure, have a look at the names and then decide what you want to say.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying hello, but you guys are not answering.
No, we can't yet, man. They're gonna open it. Yeah, they're gonna open it now.
But I'm joined.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Mark.
Guys, I think we should start.
Okay, we've got 65 people. Okay, great, John.
That's adding. It's, you know, give it a chance. I think people are just getting home and just had dinner.
I mean, it is. There are more people logging in as we speak. Okay, I'll give it 2 more minutes and then I'm pushing.
And Stavros?
Minister?
You remember I'm recorded that I speak too fast. So you must get everybody to understand that my brain processes very fast. So my speaking has to be concomitant to the pace at which my brain processes. So I can't slow it down unless I go to slumber.
No, but I don't know. The Premier told me when you were his spokesperson, he said everyone understood every.
You remember I'm recorded that I speak too fast. So you must get everybody to understand that my brain processes very fast. So my speaking.
That's why I asked you which energy bar you're taking. But can I just say when I spoke to the Premier, he said to me when you were his spokesperson, he said everyone always understood what you said.
You remember? So you must to understand that my brain processes very
Dear all, on behalf of the HIP Alliance and in specific the Hellenic section of the HIP Alliance, I want to thank you all for joining our webinar today. As the HIP Alliance, we have fielded many calls in the aftermath of the unrest that recently enveloped our country, and as a result, felt it prudent to engage with our communities today. I want to thank the people involved with arranging and organising this event, especially our speakers, the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, the clergy and my fellow HIP Alliance colleagues. A mention of thanks to Craig Sherman, Emmanuel Diakakis and the Minister's team. We welcome our Jewish and Lebanese attendees today. It has always been HIP's goal to highlight the contribution and concerns of the Hellenic, Italian, Portuguese and other minority communities within South Africa. And we will continue to do this undeterred. We will continue our social compact projects and charitable work that is so desperately needed right now. Our heritage, customs and religion may be as Hellenic or Italian, etc., but we do so as South Africans. As South Africans, we need to unite and create prosperity for all. But most importantly, we need to get involved. I now would like to hand over to Anastasiou to start tonight's proceedings. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, very good evening to you all. Thank you very much for the introduction, John, and a special welcome to the Honourable Minister, the Acting Minister in the Presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, and also a big welcome as well to Dr. Stavros Nicolaou, who's the Chairman of the HIP Alliance, and Mr. Zev Krengel from the SA Jewish Board of Deputies, the National Vice President of the South African Vice President of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. Welcome you all, and welcome to everybody that's joining us today, wherever you might be in the country. It's lovely to have you with us. I'm glad the temperature's improved. I'm glad our numbers are coming down across the country. But before we get into our discussion, I think we have to have a very, very frank and open discussion. I would like to invite and introduce and a warm welcome to His Eminence, the Archbishop Damaskinos, to lead us into prayer before we start tonight's proceedings. So, Archbishop Damaskinos, good evening to you. Kalispera σας, σεβασμιότατε.
Was it not? They need to unmute.
Archbishop, I think you're on mute. If you can unmute yourself so we can hear you. And just shift your... Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much because you invite me in this conference, in this
webinar.
In this meeting. Let us pray to the Lord.
Lord have mercy.
Our God, Βασιλεύ ουράνιε παράκλητε το πνεύμα της αληθείας, ο πανταχού παρών και τα πάντα πληρών, ο θησαυρός των αγαθών και ζωής χορηγός, ελθέ και σκήνωσον εν μήν, και καθάρισον ημάς από πάσης κυλίδος, και σώσον αγαθέτας ψυχάς ημών. Almighty God, give all of us in South Africa love, freedom, stability, abundance, and peace for this country. Unity of South Africans. All of these are gifts of God. And all of this we can keep in our life every day. I mean, I would like, on behalf of the Orthodox Church in South Africa, to wish you to have a good progress and a good discussions and explanations in this conference about the country. But all of us, we must remember that we are passengers in the same ship. And all of us, we must cooperate. All of us, we must keep to be united, because if we have problem with the passengers of the ship does not go in the right tangent, but has problem. It's very simple that everything that I say to you, and all of these simple words, we must keep in our mind, in our hearts, and also please keep the unite, keep the love, keep the stability, keep the peace. I mean, thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Your Eminence, and thank you very much for leading us into prayer. And really, you know, we're all on the same ship, and you're 100% right. So when you look at us today, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to all of you. If you have just joined us, you missed our very brief introduction earlier. I'd like to welcome you all to this HIP Alliance webinar entitled South Africa After the Unrest. And I think that we're all questioning so much of what has happened in the last month. And, you know, I've had time to reflect as well as everybody else. I remember 27 years ago, flying around in the helicopter, covering our very first democratic election. In fact, you can't see it here, but there's a picture here that was taken by the Associated Press, taken over Soweto, of the snaking queue of people waiting to cast their first votes in 1994. And I've had the privilege of covering every other democratic election in this country since '94. But I think what we've all seen in the last few weeks has just torn us all apart. And I think that when you look at us as a country and you look at this rainbow nation that we started off as back in 1994, and you look at the current, you know, the current global poster child that we became of this rainbow nation that we talk about, ironically now we're a global poster child for economic inequality. And this is the reality in South Africa, where we have deep poverty that sits in the shadow of this astronomical wealth. What role do we all play in this? What role can we play for us to get out of the situation that we're in at the moment? How did we get here? And I think that, you know, if you look at the age-old problems, we cannot ignore things like corruption, state failure, tribalism, cronyism. Has our government failed us? Has the ANC led us down the incorrect path? Or has the ANC had its own challenges to overcome to make, you know, to balance the inequality of the past? So I guess there are lots of questions, and we can sit and philosophize this for a long, long time. But what has happened in the last few months is a stark wake-up call for all of us. It's a wake-up call that this violence has deeper roots than the former President Zuma, for example. I mean, this has got a lot to do with the fact that we are living in a country where we have 74% of our youths under the age of 25 that are jobless. 43% of the entire population of potential workers in South Africa do not have a job. Half of all South Africans are chronically poor. And the most neglected of all, the level of assets and inequality, of income inequality, make this country the most economically unjust society on earth. I'm not making these statistics up. These are statistics that have come from global economists, global think tanks that describe South Africa as the most unjust society in the world. Not just in Africa, in the world. We have a lack of confidence. We have a lack of hope right now. But at the end of the day, I think that as South Africans, we have demonstrated when we get together and we put our differences aside, what we can really truly achieve in this magnificent country that we're in. And hence this discussion that we want over here. And ultimately, I want us to go back to '94, where the much political touted slogan was a better life for all. And I think ultimately, that is what we have to strive to achieve. A better life for all South Africans. What do we do about it? What role does the HIP Alliance have to play? And it's a great pleasure for me to welcome the head of the Health Committee of Business for South Africa. That's one of his roles. He's also the chairman of the HIP Alliance. and it's none other than Dr. Stavros Nicolaou. Stavros and I have had many conversations like this. I remember pre-94, Stavros, that we had a very similar birth of this particular movement before the first democratic elections. I remember that day so distinctly at the Cypriot Club when we had Tokyo Sekhwale sitting there with other political leaders at the time, and that was just over 28 years ago. It was a year before the election, and even then we spoke about the inequality that we have to overcome. 28 years down the line, we're still having the same discussion. But I remain optimistic, and I know you're one of the most optimistic people I've met. So without any further ado, Dr. Stavros Nicolaou, it's over to you.
IT Program Director, thanks very much for those introductory remarks. You're quite right, we did have this discussion over 28 years ago, and you don't seem to have aged a single day, so it means you continue to be optimistic, and I think you continue to demonstrate your optimism, most certainly. May I also, whilst I'm getting my slides up, may I also take the opportunity to acknowledge the Minister. She has a dual portfolio. She's the acting Minister in the Presidency, but also moonlights at the moment as the Minister for Small Business, a very critical portfolio in our country, as you've heard from Aki. Ladies and gentlemen, let me also just acknowledge and greet the other fellow panelists, in particular Zef Krengel, who continues to demonstrate that same optimism around the country, and Zef and the Jewish Board of Deputies, the HIP communities have had many discussions, very often find ourselves in a very similar position, all want to embrace the mainstream of South African society, all want to contribute positively. And in the same vein, we also have some of our South African Lebanese colleagues on the call. So I think that's the first order of duty this evening, is just to greet you all and thank you for your individual contributions. And as Aki said, only if we work together, shoulder to the wheel, all of us, can we reverse many, if not all, of the images that we saw. Many of these images were haunting images, and I think many of these can be reversed, provided we all work together as we have been doing. But also, there's a need to re-look at some of the economic models of the country, there's no doubt. I'm here this evening in my Business for South Africa capacity, and I wanted to touch on two aspects. The first is I wanted to just consider for a moment what happened a fortnight ago, what were its manifestations, but I think more importantly, what do we do as a country to move forward? I think that's what investors, we've spoken to many of the overseas investors, and I think many of them have discounted what happened in part as an emerging market phenomenon. It most certainly has some idiosyncratic elements when we look at South Africa, and Aki has very aptly articulated what those are. And many are prepared to give us the benefit of the doubt. But I think what they're more interested in, and I think what we should probably all be more interested in, is how do we move forward from the events of 2 weeks ago? What actions do we take as a country collectively to move forward and put ourselves on a completely different trajectory? Can I just get my first slide, Sanele? Let's just consider for a moment, why did this happen? And there are many hypotheses and theories that are floating around as to what happened 2 weeks ago, and it's probably best to describe this as a conflation of a number of issues. Many of them have been brewing for many years, for many months. I'm not going to cover all of the conflations, but unquestionably, as the President of the Republic said, there was certainly an element of economic sabotage. Some people might say it was orchestrated. There was no doubt an element of the inequality that exists in the country, a widening Gini coefficient. A significant part of our youth, particularly ages of 18 to 30, remain unemployed in our country. And then, of course, there was also an element of, unquestionably, an element of what we would consider to be the melting pot or the overboil of a COVID pandemic that has been extremely damaging to the economy and to people's lives and livelihoods. So it was a conflation of all of these issues. Sorry, can you just excuse me for 1 second? I just need to connect my computer. Apologies. 1 sec.
So while Stavros is doing that, let me also just remind you all that tonight's session is a very interactive session, right? So please, any comments that you want to make, any questions that you have for any of the speakers, which we will get to at the end of this particular webinar, we will ask those questions. And I want us to ask the brutal, tough questions. I want us to dig in deep and ask the uncomfortable questions. We need to be uncomfortable with what is going on around us in this country. And I'd like to urge you just to put your questions in the chat section and your thoughts. It doesn't necessarily have to be a question. What are your thoughts on the topic tonight? So, Stavros, are you back?
Sorry, I am. Apologies for that, Aki. And I was just saying that unquestionably, 17 months of grinding hardship that has been occasioned by the most destructive pandemic that we've known has certainly taken its toll, and I think things boiled over, and that was part of the reason. So if we to analyze these different conflations, those are some of the elements. I don't intend going through all of those, but as a preface to the presentation I'm going to make, I've decided that this evening it would be good to focus on trying to analyze why this happened, but more importantly, as I said earlier, how do we move forward from here? How do these communities move forward? Understandably, their confidence has been shattered in some respects, and in fact, in many respects. How do we move forward from this? What is our role, and how do we contribute to broader society to allow us to move forward, so that we don't get a repeat of those, as I said, those harrowing and haunting visuals we saw 2 weeks ago. And I've also, with a particular bias, had a look at, and that's why I spent a bit of time saying that the impact of the pandemic has also taken a toll. It's not only taken an economic and a public health toll, but it's taken a mental health toll as well on the country. Mental well-being has been put under immense scrutiny like never before. And it's because of all this uncertainty, because of all, people are losing. There's hardly anyone probably on this call that hasn't lost a family member or a close friend or someone that we know. So all of these factors have come into play. But I'm more interested in how do we move forward from here. And secondly, because I'm talking about the pandemic so extensively, at the center of the pandemic and at the center, I believe, of our economic recovery and how we lift ourselves up. And we've done this many times as South Africans. We measure our resilience as South Africa, not as South Africans, not how many times we go down, but it's how many times do we go down and lift ourselves up again. And I think part of that lifting exercise is an efficient, effective, and swift vaccination program. So I'm going to cover those two aspects in the next ensuing slides. So let's just have a look at what 2 or 3 weeks ago, what has that cost the economy? So firstly, it's estimated that around 50 billion rand was lost in output. Potentially 150,000 jobs have been placed at risk. And we know that in the looting, around R1.5 billion was lost. That's obviously placed a significant emphasis on Sasria and various other related Sasria matters. Before the events of 2 weeks ago, Bloomberg's and JP Morgan were both estimating a growth of around 0.5% to 1% for Q3. That's the quarter that we're currently in. And as a consequence of the unrest, the protests, the revised projections from both of these entities is that the economy will contract by 3%. So that places in very stark contrast what we were expecting at the beginning of the quarter. Furthermore, CNBC reported that South Africa's economic growth prospects declined by 3.8%, almost 4%, post the riots, from a positive 4.3 pre-riots. And then lastly, the World Bank had South Africa to grow at 3.5% for the quarter, and you can see that we are likely to register a decline for the quarter. So certainly at an economic metric level, the unrest and violence, the consequences of that are pretty clear in terms of the economic picture. I'm not really going to cover the toll on the social picture and all the other elements. I think we need to first look at what is the economic impact. Next slide. Okay, we can unpack this a little more, and we could say that the overall loss in terms of KZN long-term prospects, and this was reported by the mayor of Ntshavheni amongst others, is in the range of 10 to 15 billion rand. We also saw 1,200 retail outlets looted, and as I said, 150,000 informal traders were also targeted in this. And in the context of the vaccine rollout program, 120 pharmacies were looted, burnt down, or had to close. And everyone expected that the vaccine rollout program would suffer a mortal blow. And in fact, that didn't happen. And if we go to my next slide. Okay, what did we actually see happening once the violence broke out and society was starting to come to terms with the shock it had experienced? What did we actually see in real terms? Because we could have gone one of two ways as a country. You could have had the whole country plunging into the same level of unrest. It could have become completely pervasive in all 9 provinces, and you could have had ongoing looting for weeks on end until you had nothing left, right? We could have had the vaccine program, and there's nothing more important than the vaccination program right now to getting us back to an element of normality and opening up the economy again. As I said, the program was expected to, at very least, be disrupted for weeks on end. In fact, we saw a strengthening of the program. So we lost around 45,000 vaccinations a day for the first 2 days. We went down from 170,000 vaccines per day in the preceding days of the outbreak of the violence, and we dropped to around 140,000 2 days after the violence started to subside. And then we suddenly picked up. We went to 230, 240,000. We're averaging 220,000 at the moment. Now, why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because society reacted in a very positive way. So despite all the trauma and despite us all being shocked to the core, society stood up and said, you know, we're not having this. And that's what gives myself, it gives a lot of investors confidence in this country, is how did private and public sector work together? How did we get together to try and solve the immediacy of the problems? And how did society react? Society pushed back in a very strong way. Communities protected their local economies and immediately assisted with the cleanup effort. We saw that. We saw business and government working together to donate supplies, food parcels, and other things that are important for everyday life to continue. We saw society donating these things again. We saw the Solidarity Fund again coming into play and starting to donate food parcels and the likes thereof. We saw taxi owners and taxi federations, who are often cast as the villains. We saw that grouping coming together and protecting property and livelihoods like we had never seen before. This was a test of our judicial system. It was a test of the rule of law. And I think we've demonstrated again as South Africans that we respect the rule of law, despite what we would have seen on those visuals. When sanity prevailed, a number of arrests have been made, special courts have been set up, and the rule of law remains paramount in all of this. These are all things that investors are going to look at. Of course, we need to condemn in the strongest terms the life that was lost. You know, you can always try and bring property back and equipment and stock, but you can't bring back a human life. And that's the regrettable part here. And I'm really hoping that the perpetrators now understand that you cannot bring a human life, but they also should understand that the best attempts have failed here because society pushed back like it hasn't pushed back before. And that gives me a lot of confidence moving forward. So my next slide. I spoke about the vaccine rollout program, and I'm putting this at the center of economic recovery here. And I've also indicated in previous webinars that there's no more important economic recovery plan right now in our country than vaccinating as many people as quickly as possible. And again, if there was a test ever of the durability and resilience of South Africans, it's the fact that we got the program running again when many, as I said, would have expected it to collapse. And that gives me a lot of hope, because if we can respond in the midst of a crisis, the way we responded around the food parcel relief, the protection of property, ensuring that we didn't lose a beat with the vaccine rollout program, those are all immensely positive aspects that would give investors confidence that they should be giving South Africa a second look. Many have said, well, we're going to turn investors away forever. But I think the way the markets have responded, the way investors have responded and said, look, we're judging you by how you reacted, and we're judging you with how you respond futuristically. That gives a lot of confidence. And I'm pleased to say that right now, we are almost at 8 million vaccinations. If you take the last month of July, we were amongst the fastest in the world on a per capita basis, faster than countries like Germany, Italy, and some of the other European countries. So this demonstrates to me, ladies and gentlemen, that we can, when the chips are down, we can respond. When we work together as South Africans, private and public sector, we can achieve anything, including amongst the fastest vaccine rollout, as we did in July when we started working together. Next slide. Okay, I've pretty much covered this. This gives us the trajectory for the vaccine rollout, over the next 6 or 7 months. At the current trajectory and where we are building our capacity up to, we will in fact leapfrog many countries around the world, particularly emerging markets, which is what we of course are considered to be. And this is important, of course, so that we can reopen up our economies again. We can remove this boiling pot that I spoke about earlier. We can return to some element of normality. And importantly, we can start trading with our international partners again. Part of the concern we had earlier this year when we had a slow start to the vaccine rollout was that our international trading partners had vaccinated significant swathes of their population, had opened up their economies, and were reluctant to trade with us. So the quicker we get this done, and we're on a good pathway at the moment, the quicker we can open up again, we can start attracting tourists again into our country, we can start bringing investors back in, we can start trading bilaterally and multilaterally. So this is critical, and the program stood the test of time. It stood up to the most violent attempts to disrupt it, pharmacies burning down, GP practices burning down, stood the test to all of those things, and we were able to move forward. And I'm using the vaccine rollout program as a rallying point for how we can look at the future. So we can look at the future as the visuals continue haunting us, we're helpless, we're never going to recover from this, let's pack up and go. Or we can say we see opportunity, and the opportunity that we see is the following 3 issues I want to leave you with. The first is that the events of 2 or 3 weeks ago do provide some silver lining. It provides an opportunity for us to reflect as a country and as a society, and to start pursuing a new economic model. An economic model that will make sense for many more of the population than it currently is the case. We can dream of a new economic model along the lines of further accelerating the economic structural reform that our country needs to embark on. We've seen some of those economic structural reforms, but not all of them. And I'm sure the Minister will speak about some of those in the next few minutes. We should also imagine a future where we pay greater attention to developing entrepreneurs in our country. Now we know that our country has looked at a basic income grant. That's to provide some immediate relief. But it's not the long-term solution. We know that. We need to break away from dependency and creating a state of dependency to building entrepreneurs or building entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurs are what usually rallies a country into recovery. Those are some of the opportunities we need to look at. There's further opportunities around how do we futuristically look to build confidence in the country. We might say, well, the confidence was shattered 2 or 3 weeks ago. But I think conversely, investors have said, look, what we have noted this time around is how the private and the public sectors have worked together. And that's about building confidence. We need to build on those aspects. The vaccine rollout program, private and public sector are working together seamlessly. We need to look at those other areas in the economy where we can work together, private and public sector, to rally our country to new heights and new growth points. Very lastly, I know that all of you are probably sitting here and wondering, that the events were just too traumatic to deal with. You can't deal with them going forward, and how are we ever going to emerge from this? And I think when you're at that point, remember how the vaccine program rallied in the midst of some of the some of the worst violence perpetrated against the healthcare system in this country. It rallied. Think about how ordinary South Africans put their hands in their pockets and extended a helping hand to those that had been devastated by this. Think of those that contributed to the Solidarity Fund to ensure that people that had no bread and milk got bread and milk. So think about all of those examples and think about the future and the difference we can all make. Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure speaking to you this evening.
Thank you so much, Stavros. And I see that we already have several questions that have come in. And thank you very much for all the questions. Please do keep them coming in. I see your questions there, Zolani. I see some of you have typed in anonymous questions saying you are speaking from a place of comfort. Most of us protected the infrastructure we have as we don't want to lose out. Our people want economic freedom now and not later than tomorrow. We can't speak of economic recovery without speaking onto economic imbalances in our country. Blacks continue to be poor while whites continue to enjoy wealth of the country more than any other race. Well, I guess that could be debated, but the reality of the inequality cannot be debated. It is a stark reminder of where we are in our society in South Africa, and we should all be hanging our heads in shame as to where we find ourselves right now. But we will unpack all of this as the evening progresses. I would now like to welcome our next speaker, who's going to be talking just ahead of the Minister. And I see there he is, Mr. Zev Krengel, who is the Vice President, National Vice President of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, to give us a community perspective, a message of calm, and what do we need to do as a community to move forward. Zev, good evening to you.
Thank you, Aki. Really, it's great to be on, and well done to my other speakers, especially Stavros, who's doing such great work with the vaccine rollouts and with the vaccine production. Look, for me, we did a webinar, the board, Professor Karen Milner, who's our Gauteng chair, did it like in the heart. It was I think it was the Wednesday or the Tuesday night, where South Africa was burning. I don't want to downplay the stress we all had. I think also for South Africans, and especially white South Africans, it's been a fear. We have literally lived our lives with. I'm 49 years old, and I was told by I was brought up with people immigrating saying it's going to go to nothing, and this was some of our biggest fears started coming true. We can debate where it started, who started it, how did it start. There's no doubt the Moy River toll gate and the burning of the trucks was definitely the catalyst. And then it spread, and was it spread by criminal elements? Was it politically started? And then, of course, at the end of the day, there was a lot of free ride, there was a lot of criminality, there was a lot of other issues. So I think it was one of our darker days. If I stand back, I would say it was probably Soweto riot, state of emergency. Maybe they were darker, but for the fear factor, I don't think you could have got much worse. And it wasn't a pleasant experience to be. And the same as the pandemic, I would have much preferred for it never to have happened. And I would have much preferred to try and carry on with our challenges, which are massive. And our challenges in this country are huge. I think the thing we're all struggling with as black and white South Africans is we just feel we're not getting a break long term. Like we get knocked, as I said in the webinar, I feel like we're in the ring with Mike Tyson. And as we start feeling we're getting better, and we started coming out of the COVID second wave, and the economy started going, and our rand started improving, commodities started going, exports, the mines were doing well. Then the third wave came and it knocked us. And then, we were hoping to get over the third wave, and then the rioting and looting happened. So I don't want to paint a picture that everything's brilliant, because I think it was very tough for everyone. I do think that we as the South African people are unbelievably resilient. We're a nation that civil society, once again, black, white, Indian and coloured, across the racial lines, across the religious lines, all stuck together to stand up and to protect their country, South Africa. And I really believe the level of commitment Even if you read about with the looting, how many people told the authorities about neighbours and friends and family that they'd went to loot it. So I do think we as a South African society, once again, has proven our mettle. And once again, has proven in dark hours how good we are to each other. And it was an absolute minority who did the rioting and looting, absolute minority. A lot of people try to predict it was the worst case scenario of a populist uprising with no leadership. And it wasn't a populist uprising at all. I mean, even the Minister of Defence said it herself that they were caught with their pants down. And I do think the security cluster was caught. They should have been more prepared. We should have been more prepared for what it was as a country. But we got knocked down in the first round by Mike Tyson, and it was a hard blow. We got put back into the side of the ring. Our coach gave us a good pep talk, and fans kept telling us to do well, although some people still are hoping that we fail, which we never do. And we came back and we leveled the playing fields. And, you know, you look back 2.5, 3 weeks later, our rands improved, our commodities and our taxes are coming back. The president has brought us down out of 4 to 3, which is well done to society for behaving. And our strain on the health sector is getting better. And we work through it. We really work through it as a society. I do think there's some things we need to learn from it. South Africa is a pressure cooker on many levels. And I just think it was too much in one scenario. There were 3 weeks of many things. An immediate past president was arrested. You had a third wave happening with a level 4 lockdown. You know, and we've had incredibly slow growth. We'd had a fairly low vaccine rollout at the time. So I think there was a lot of frustration. But looking back at the time, I was quite optimistic, and I'm actually more optimistic 10 days, 2 weeks later. I think government did come to the party unbelievably well. I think no one believed that N3 highway would have been opened by the Monday. We, as the Jewish community in Durban, was very rattled, and we were very worried about, you know, what the food safety and the food security. And we read all the doomsday scenarios that there's going to be massive lines and queues. And as Stavros said before me, the South Africa works at its best when it's a public-private partnership. When government and private sector work together, it doesn't happen as often as I personally would like. I think there's a certain level of wariness from government, and I think there's a certain level of wariness from the private sector. But government got that N3 opened, and I mean the likes of Pick n Pay and Boxer and all the others, I mean they brought food back into KZN like no one's seen. I mean those trucks came in, they opened the Moy River toll gate, the trucks just went go, 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 go. And literally this doomsday scenario of the people starving in KZN, and it's going to take 6-8 weeks, and there's going to be airlifts, and there's going to be flights, and how they're going to, it all ended where literally almost every person in KZN got fed. And those doomsdays, we proved as the government working with the private sector, we proved all the naysayers wrong. So I'm personally would have preferred it not to happen, and we can scrutinise why it did happen, and we really pray and hope that government takes its precautions that it doesn't happen again, because there are always sparks that these, and if there is going to be a spark, government needs to understand where the spark is and what it's going to do. But I think, as I said, they reacted late, government, but when they reacted well. I think the other thing that no one likes to give is how the South African Defence Force actually is not a police service, and I think any constitutional democracy is uncomfortable seeing soldiers on their streets, but how well the Defence Force did. I mean, they policed well. There were no reported cases of any brutality or deaths at the Defence Force, and you need to give government its credit. It came late, but it did, it did come through. And then, as I said, I have to give unbelievable credit to the private sector for restocking, for being committed. And then for me, it was civil society. I mean, we went to Davidton to go and do a cleanup operation literally on the Wednesday or the Thursday. I mean, where places were still burning, and the level of commitment of the people around these centers that have been absolutely brutally looted and destroyed was just incredible how quickly it was cleaned up. It's going to take time. I don't think it's going to be a quick, I think KZN, it's always going to be wary. Once something breaks, it's hard to fix it. It's much easier to burn something down and build it up. But we as a society did very well, really moving much closer to the Greek community and the minority communities, the white minority communities, whether it's religion or nationality, the Jewish, Portuguese, the Greek communities. I think we have an obligation as whites, as minorities, and as South African citizens to the broader South Africa, to ourselves. I think South Africa has been unbelievably good to us as South African citizens. The majority of us, the majority of South African Jewry are Lithuanian descendants. We came to the shores of South Africa from the late 1800s to most probably the mid-1930s, when we were stopped to come as Jews. The quotas were stopped, and a lot of our families were killed and murdered in the Holocaust. But I think Africa and South Africa has been unbelievably good, not only to the Jewish community, but to especially South Africa, to the Greek, Portuguese community, the minorities. And I just hope we can get stronger out of this. We can get closer out of this, and we can decide what we're going to learn from this. The knee-jerk reaction of the naysayers was not proven correct, and we've done very well. We've done. Am I still on?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so I think we've really done unbelievably well as a society. And I just really want to congratulate anyone who was positive, who worked theory. How do we go from here? I think that's a lot of the questions I've been asked. And I do believe that sometimes we do live a bit insular. And I do think we, as different communities, need to understand the importance of working in the greater South Africa and take ownership. We live in a constitutional democracy. You can love the government, you can hate the government, you can support the ANC, you can support the EFF, you can support the DA, but be a part of South Africa, be a part of this great nation. And between you and me, I think we are in a lot better position than we think we are. And I really fully agree with Stavros that the vaccine rollout's doing unbelievably well. And let's hope our economy can start ticking over. And I'm just saying, personally, I'm committed to this country, committed to its success. And I want to see job creation, I want to see wealth creation, and I want to see education. So let us all do it together. And I do plea with the minister and the government to work with the private sector, because we make an unbelievable partnership when you have the private and public sector together, working together. And I just really want to wish everyone the best. It wasn't a simple period. And I'm telling you that we didn't lose, like some people lost livelihoods, jobs, and it wasn't just the rich multinationals. People lost their businesses, they lost their livelihoods. So it wasn't a pleasant situation. But we'll be judged how we move from this unpleasant situation and make this country a great country that we deserve it to be, as all South Africans. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for that, Zev. Zev, of course, is the National Vice President of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. Thank you very much for that introduction, Zev. We got lots of questions that we're going to get through, and there's some really tough questions that need to be answered. And I know some of you are responding anonymously, which is fine. But if you can give us your names as well. I mean, we're having a very frank and open discussion. But this is what it's about, so you can remain anonymous if you like. Please do type in your questions, your thoughts on what you've heard so far. And after the minister has finished speaking, we will have a Q&A. We'll address some of your questions and really discuss what we're all here to discuss. And the importance of today's webinar is to where to from here. And 50 billion rand is what it's cost our GDP. And the inequality, it keeps coming up over and over in all of the comments in the section. So keep typing them in. We'll get to those right after the minister has spoken. And it's a great pleasure to welcome the minister. I remember when the minister was announced by President Ramaphosa, I think it was in January of this year, Minister, if I'm not mistaken. You are the Minister of Small Business Development as well, so you're actually effectively wearing two hats. You're the acting minister in the presidency, and really you've had a very tough role to deal with, because I mean, so much of what we're going to be talking about really touches on so many of your roles that you have in government. So great pleasure to welcome you, Minister Khumbudzo Ntshavheni. I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you for joining us. We really do appreciate your time, Minister.
Thank you, Aki, and thank you to everybody who's participating, to the Archbishop for the prayer, and everybody, and the HIP Alliance for the invitation. When our mutual friend, Ambassador Mopela, said to me, I think you need to talk to this community, I was asking myself, how will the conversation go? But until Stavros spoke, I realized that I should have just been here to fill the questions. And unfortunately, I'll have to be excused at 8 o'clock. I have another commitment which we need to get to. So I may not stay longer for the conversations beyond that. Stavros says, I moonlight in small business. Actually, I moonlight in the presidency. I'm the Minister for Small Business Development. So maybe where do I start? Because everybody has done the intro of the context of where we are or where we have been. But for me, the issue is that the event of 3 weeks ago could be a precursor to a bigger situation if certain things are not done. And that will not be because the security cluster would have been caught napping, they would have been ready. But no matter the number of police and number of soldiers you deploy against hungry people, it cannot solve the problem. So the IMF, and people have read statistics, and I want to differ with some of the statistics, but it's fine. The IMF said South Africa is amongst the top leading in the inequality stakes, and this is the report they produced last year. And last year, October, they say 20% of the populations hold 68% of the income, whereas 40% of the population that is below, which is unfortunately majority Black and African, holds 77% of the income. And the unemployment rate, and the official statistic is that unemployment rate by Q1 of this year is 32.6%, and the minister responsible for Presidency, so I'm quoting the Presidency figures. And that number for youth between the ages of 15 to 34 years is 46.3%. This is Q1 of this year. So if majority of our people, the poor, remains unemployed, they earn a meager income, they go hungry, what is supposed to happen to a population? And I like what Zev said. He said, and I want to quote, that South Africa has been very good to the minorities. Imagine a Black child in KwaMashu, in Makwarela, in Langa, in Nyanga, in Soweto, and in Alexander, hearing Zev saying South Africa has been good to the minorities, whereas it has not been good to a Black child. What does that feel like? And it's good to make that acknowledgement, because when you make that acknowledgement, you start to say, how do I give back? Because, and I'm glad that we are meeting here with some of you. If there is a community, if there are communities that are entrepreneurial in this country, is this community that we are talking to today. The Hellenics, the Italians, the Portuguese, you've brought in the Lebanese and the Jews. And this is the most entrepreneurial of our communities in this country. So the question that I have in this discussion is to say, how do we bring your lived experience in entrepreneurship to create opportunities for the youth that are unemployed? How do you create, and not just youth, Black African youth in this country? Because the more we just talk about youth in general and not be specific to the group that is unemployed, we won't address the issue. Because what this situation has brought to us is to open our eyes to say, it's not government that's going to be a loser alone. It's also the private sector that is going to be a loser. And we have always said, no, this is ANC factional issues, this is the problem of government. And business claim to have come to the party, but reports that we have seen are saying majority of big business have kept their monies in reserves in their bank accounts, but they have not invested that in the country to create employment and opportunities for Black people, for women, and for young people in particular. So this is a question that we all have to say, how is business, big and small, in South Africa going to come to the party? How does the HIP Alliance as a community come to the party and say, in the communities where you reside, whether you are in KZN, whether you are in Gauteng, whether you are in Limpopo, whether you're in Cape Town, whether you are in the Eastern Cape, how do you come to the party in those communities and make sure that young women who are Black are supported to run businesses successfully? That when in their supply chains, value chains, and I know some, I think the Portuguese in the main, they run the corner shops. I grew up in buying in a corner shop of one of the Portuguese families, and I was saying, how do you make sure that you assist that young person who's running a spaza shop that it can grow to become another corner shop in another area? Because those are the fundamental things we must deal with. Because I see the cleaning campaigns, we can all clean, but that is not meaningful. What is meaningful is that how do we change the income levels of these people? How do we deal with meaningfully with inequality? We can do donations, it's fine, but you can't donate every day. But also you don't give dignity to people when you donate. What you give dignity to is when you create a job that person will be able to work and an income, or you create an opportunity for that person to start their own business or support them to run their own business and make sure that their business thrives. And I understand the context of ZEF, where it comes from, to say when they came through, when they were after the Holocaust and everything, and they came through, they were supported to make sure that the Lithuanian Jews, when they landed here, and any other Jewish community that when they landed here, and any other minority, they could survive. And the question is, how do we use that experience to support Black people, to support women, to support young people? Because we cannot continue to speak from our positions of comfort. We must really make the rubber must hit the tar in meaningful ways and not in superficial ways. Because if we don't do it, we are sitting in a time bomb, if not worse. And when we go again, you are part of the largest, you may be the largest employers if we aggregate yourselves as communities, even in the small businesses that you run. The people that you employ in those shops of yours, the people that you employ in those businesses of yours, in those chains that you run, the network of businesses that you run, how can we account that those people are South African? And linked to that issue is the issue of racism. And I was baffled when I went to Soweto after the riots and everything. And the rule was they didn't attack Maponya Mall, though the community also defended because it's a Black-owned business. But they went to attack Jabulani Mall and Protea Mall, and they say it's white monopoly capital. But it's owned by Mike Nkuna. It's an old man from Limpopo. I know him personally. And young people are asking, and somebody asked the very question here, to say we guarded those shopping centers, we guarded those malls, but what then? Because even the security in the shopping centers that white people run is not done, it's not by South Africans, Blacks, African in particular. It's done somehow, it's not even by the local community. You go to, even if you go to a neighborhood that a business operates, a cleaning company is not a cleaning company from that township. And we're still saying the community came to the party. Yes, the community came to the party. So us as government, as business, what are we doing in exchange for to reward the community, but not to reward the community, but to say this South Africa belongs to all, not only in political sense, but also in economic sense. Because that's what we need to deal with. Because if we don't do that and we start to, Blacks will always remain the ones who beg, who receive donations, who receive handouts, and whites will remain the ones who give the handouts and who we go to for donations. We're not going to, this problem that we're dealing with today is not going to be resolved. Yes, there were opportunistic elements that went into that, but there will be a point. I was reading a report earlier about the hunger levels. That's why the president and the governing party took a decision that we must reintroduce the 350 grant now, because families were sleeping hungry now, not tomorrow. Now they were sleeping hungry. Children are surviving by one meal which they get at school. That's why even a court ruled that even when schools are closed, children must go to school to have food. We cannot resolve that situation by donations. We can resolve that situation by assisting communities to build their own enterprises. And I'm talking like this freely because you are communities that have done that. So how do we take that experience, your lived experience, to go to my community in Makwarela, in Sibasa, in Thoyando, in Thulamela, in Bembe? How do we take that lived experience to say, okay, you can help put a vegetable garden which will sell food to which will sell the vegetables to the school, to the spa shops that you own, and then so that I run my business. And when I'm selling the spinach from my garden to the spa that you own, or the cabbage to the spa that you own, or the Pick and Pay that you own, or the corner shop that you own, you can then you say, no, can we train you to run a business? This is profit and loss. This is how it's done. This is enterprise development. If you are doing this, this is how how you can aggregate your volume. And I'm just using that simple example to say, how do we contribute in a different manner? Because if we don't, the racism is going to entrench, because even when you are not racist, but whatever your attitude is, your effort will be deemed as demeaning because I'm sitting at a position of disadvantage. Because I'll always be lower to you because you are higher because of your wealth that you have, and therefore you'll treat me as not as an equal, because I cannot be an equal when I'm lower in terms of income. I cannot be an equal when I'm not in the economic table, or the table that we discuss all things that are important, and therefore that will translate as you being racist, and it will not be racism, but that will be interpreted as racism. So we must then deal with that, because we've got, historically, our country needs to deal with a whole lot of things. We need to address the challenges that were brought by inequality, by racism, by discrimination based on gender, on age, and all those things. But the fact that majority of Black people do not own the economy. To date, almost 27 years later, the economy of South Africa still belongs to the minority. And we cannot sit here and be pleased. We cannot sit here and pepper through those cracks. We must say, how do we translate, how do we transform that economy so that we can bring those who have to come through? Not through corruption, not through theft, not through plundering of state resources, because we must deal with those things. But how do we build a society of equal? How do we make sure that that partnership is not a partnership at lip service? It's a partnership that says, how is a Black woman empowered? Is a Black youth empowered? Is a Black man empowered? Is a disabled person empowered? Economically, not politically, economically. We must have those conversations. And let me finish off by saying on one thing that I want to talk about. Because this growth, or the South Africa, when it grows on its own, it becomes a magnet for the rest of the sister countries in the continent. So the growth and development of South Africa cannot be excluded or cannot be isolated from the growth and development of the rest of the continent. So the reindustrialization of South Africa must include the reindustrialization of the African continent. So as a department and government, we are planning to host an SMME summit for 20 major countries in the continent, but also in Southern Africa, SADC in particular, to participate and say, how do we develop a partnership to grow and match our SMME so that we can then harness the benefit of this market of 1.3 billion people. And I'm using this opportunity because the Portuguese, they have countries in the continent that they are dominant economically. The Italians, same. I don't know about the Hellenics, but I'm sure they are in the same category. The Jews are there, the Lebanese are there. How do you partner with us in terms of supporting, linking us with that network in these other countries? We'll share the names of the countries as soon as they are finalized. How do you link us? How do we support us to link up with this network of the other HIP alliances across the continent, so that we can link them to the other SMMEs in the continent and develop particular hubs so that the growth of South Africa is not in isolation, because it will always attract those who are poor, those who are vulnerable from the rest of the continent. Therefore, we must make sure that South Africa does not grow alone. South Africa grows with others. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Chairperson.
Thank you so much, Minister. I really appreciate it. And I know you are pressed for time because you've got to leave at 8 o'clock. So do stay with us for a couple of questions. I did call the President, by the way. I'm just telling you, we'll be running a little bit late after 8 o'clock. So don't feel too bad if you stay a few extra minutes. But thank you very much, Minister. You know, there's no doubt that you have a very crucial portfolio that you have to play at the moment. But I'm looking at some of the questions, and you know, one of the questions over here is, you know, it comes from Zolani. It's more of a comment as well as a question that he made earlier. And you know, what actions need to be, no, let me get to his, he talks about the deep inequality, the poverty and the unemployment, which you've really covered. But Zolani says that a true recovery is dependent on government at all levels decisively dealing with corruption and redirecting resources towards improving the lives of the ordinary citizens. Now, with respect, Minister, you did mention and you painted a scenario which is the reality, the racism and all the other issues that we have. But how much accountability does the acting government take for where we find ourselves today? And I look at the backdrop of corruption, and I look at the mood out in the street where people are angry. They've seen these things happening. They believe that government is overspending, that they believe the resources aren't being channeled in the right direction. How much of a responsibility does the ANC and the ruling government take in where we find ourselves today? And let me remind you of the slogan that was painted back in 2014 that the ANC had in 2014, where it says a better life for all. And quite clearly, 27 years down the line, that isn't a better life for all. So how much accountability does your government take for where we are today? Because I don't believe you dealt it efficiently in your comments, Minister, with respect.
Thank you, Aki, for that question. I don't think we can take leave of absence from ourselves, and we cannot disassociate ourselves with whatever has happened in the past. But if you are sitting here in South African, you know the effort that's being made to get rid of corruption, to make sure those who have been found wanting or found with their hands in the cookie jar are dealt with, irrespective of the level of the political position they hold, both in the governing party and also in government. That's why you've got prominent leaders of the ANC in court for corruption. That's why you've got former prominent government people in court for corruption. And it doesn't mean that when we're saying we're dealing with corruption, there will not be those who continue to attempt they think they're clever, they can beat the system, they'll be corrupt. There will be those who continue to attempt to do that, and they must be dealt with speedily. And that's the pace at which we are pushing ourselves to say, how fast can we move to deal with corruption? How fast can we, as it's detected, can it be dealt with immediately? That is one part. And for me, we cannot go back and say, no, we are not responsible. It has happened under our watch, whether as an individual, as Khumbudzo, whether I was there or not, it's immaterial. I've been a member of the ANC since I was born, and people ask me why. I was born in a womb of an ANC woman. So I've been a member of the ANC since I was born. I've been in the public service for long, though I went into entrepreneurship. But bottom line is that we are dealing with corruption. And the issue is that the depth and the extent to which corruption pervaded society in South Africa. Because even now, wherever you go, small things, people want to see me, Aki, somebody who say, no, I'll introduce you to Khumbudzo, but can we talk? You understand, that kind of thing. And that is corruption in its own. Even in business, that it happened. But we are dealing with corruption in this time. And the other challenge that the contra question will be, how is private sector dealing with the corruption amongst its midst? Because, and we use the term, and when I was a few years ago, we used to say, when is black people is corruption, when is white people is white collar crime. And so if we don't name it the same, and want to treat it differently. Corruption is corruption. It doesn't matter whether it's done by a black man or a black woman or a white man or a white woman, whether it's done in the private sector or in the public sector. It's corruption, it must be dealt with. And are we happy with the pace at which some of the prosecutions take place? Obviously not. There can be room for improvement, and we are rebuilding capacity for that. We all know that that capacity was depleted over a period of time, and we need to rebuild that capacity. And some of the decisions you can throw back to the governing party, but the governing party is also cleaning itself and correcting its own path. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Minister, you've got such an important portfolio. I mean, take away you're the acting minister in the presidency, but the small business development of this country is really the energy that is going to drive this economy forward. Do you have the right resources as Minister of Small Business Development? And what in your mind needs to be done to re-energize this particular economy where we find ourselves today? Because it is through small business that's really going to catapult us to get us into that trajectory of growth again. So tell us about your department and what you are planning to get this economy back on track. You're on mute, Minister. There we go. We can hear you now.
Are you sure?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm saying that, do we have the right resources? No, we don't have enough resources for the work at hand. And the resources is not even about the national fiscus. The national fiscus does not even scratch the surface in terms of the investment or the allocation that is made for small business development. And it doesn't even have to be made to the department per se. It can be made to a plethora of departments that assist with that. If you conglomerate the amount of money available for small business development support, is not enough in government. But is the private sector coming to the party? It was not, but we have started to see some form of improvements. The supply value chains are being opened up now. The shelves are being available for those products that are manufactured by SMMEs. But we could go further. And I'm saying some of the products in our shops, some of the things that we stock, they could be made in South Africa wholly by small businesses. Do we have the skill set in the country? Yes, we've got a serious skill set of people in the country. If trained, if given an opportunity, if nurtured and mentored, and if incubated, they can be big businesses. They can be small businesses that are very successful. In other countries, small businesses contributing between 40 and 60% of employment, but in South Africa, it's only 10%. Why? And in other countries, small businesses, they survive in their first year. In South Africa, you have to be there for 5 years for you to be able to have a chance to survive. Why? Because us who are in the business sector are not holding and reaching out to mostly the township and rural enterprises, but also the emerging businesses from urban areas that are youth-owned, that are women-owned, because those are the type of conversation we must start to have.
Thank you, Minister. Paul Ash from the Sunday Times is asking the practical steps. And I guess we don't really have time on our side this time. The economy is really in the doldrums at the moment. We've got to do something pretty urgent. What is the government doing and what is your department doing right now with immediate effect to resolve this employment crisis that we face in our country?
So in the Department of Small Business Development or in the economic cluster, we started to realize that the fiscus on its own will not fund the gap that is required to address the challenges of small business, because they must be the job creators. So we've started to reach out to businesses. A week ago, 2 weeks ago, I spoke with the businesses that are associated to the American Chamber of Businesses to say to them, how do you partner us to make more products that are made in South Africa on your shelves and also taken by you to the export markets? So we've put practically to say, how do we work together? And we've got a program that we are launching in the few weeks about how do we enhance the manufacturing program of the Department of Small Business Development to make sure that SMMEs can manufacture their products. But secondly, for those products that are on the shelves, how do we make sure that they've got volume and capacity? Because the quality is no longer an issue. The department has sorted out the quality. But also in the township and rural enterprises, if you go to the township areas, you find your Pick and Pays, your Spars, your USafe, ShopRite checkers invading the township, making it difficult for a spaza shop to come and operate a spaza shop. That was 1,000 Rand. Now you must operate a spaza shop of Pick and Pay, which is 1 million Rand. So the conversation has turned to say, how do we get these large retailers to partner with those spaza shops, kit them either technology enablement and stocking and everything, and make sure that they are viable businesses and they do not have to then put a Pick and Pay in a village or a USafe in a village. There will be a spaza shop that is owned by Madlamini, by Bonyachi Sebe, by John and Peter and Masindi to make sure that they run and become successful. But how do we give opportunities? For instance, we are supporting motor mechanics and panel beaters to service cars, because 1.7 million cars in this country they are outside of warranty and they are outside of insurance cover. But how do we make sure that your car, Aki, is
I think we've lost the minister there. Are you still with us, Minister? She was talking about my car and I got concerned about my car. Minister, are you there? All right. It appears that we have lost the minister, which is such a pity. Minister, are you there? Are you able to hear us? Can the rest of the speakers hear me? If you can turn on your microphones and your cameras on. It's a great pity that we lost the minister there. I really wanted to, ask a final question of the minister to take us into her confidence, because she is the acting minister in the presidency, and just understand where the president is and where the president's thinking is. I just want to see if the minister is back with us, if we can let the minister in. There you are, Minister. Thank you. I know you've got to go to a very quick meeting, but take us into your confidence, and obviously you can't really divulge anything. How is the president feeling? How is the president assessing the situation in our country that we find ourselves in? He's a very optimistic man. He's been very decisive. I've got to say, I've got to give him that kind of credit. But, there's a lot of criticism about certain appointments within cabinet. I don't have to talk about the current situation that the Ministry of Health finds itself in, but the president has come under quite a considerable amount of criticism, and there's also a rumor of a cabinet reshuffle, which is perhaps what your meeting at 8 o'clock is about. I don't wish you to confirm that, but take us into the confidence of what the president is thinking and what the mood of the president is right now, and what the president is going to do to take us out of the mess that we're in right now. And many have criticized South Africa, telling us there's a leadership void in this country. Do we have a leadership void? Is President Ramaphosa the right person to guide us through this?
Thanks, Aki, for that question. By the way, my meeting is not with the president. He has no control over that meeting, and it's not about a cabinet reshuffle. That remains his sole prerogative. And we don't have a leadership void. That's why you have me here communicating, because he has dispatched us to communicate with communities like yourself. And you see government at work. I'm sure the speakers were very clear to say government, even though we were slow when we took over, when we came back big and strong. And with that, the president is an optimistic man, but not only optimistic man, he's also a realistic man. He has tasked us in the economic cluster to say, well, how do we quickly resolve the challenges that are there? How do we make sure that we forge those partnerships, not only strategically, but meaningfully, to make the right impact? How do we reorganize ourselves as government for the right impact for the communities? But how do we rebuild better? How do we rebuild stronger as a community?
Okay, Minister, thank you very, very much. I'm going to take every minute I get with you, because it's not often we get to see you. What can we as a community do? What should we as a community be doing to help the government, to help this country get out of the current economic situation we find ourselves in?
For one, you are an entrepreneurial community in the name. So my question is, how do the communities that reside close to you or closest to you, how do you make sure you mentor small businesses in those areas? How do you make sure you mentor young people in those areas to either start their own businesses, but to find their jobs, to find jobs? How do you retrain them to become, to be meaningful contributors in that society? So for me, the next conversation we need to have, I need a report back. I saw Stavros like slides. Maybe in the next slides, he'll be reporting back as the chairperson of the HIP Alliance, that the HIP Alliance community in Durban, the HIP Alliance community in Eastern Cape, in Limpopo, across the country, this is the number of young entrepreneurs they are mentoring. This is the number of spaces they've opened in their businesses or in the supply chains for small businesses to use Black-owned, women-owned, youth-owned, in that to get their businesses to prosper. And how do you just avail opportunities that you have access to? How do you support those young people to be gainfully employed? How do you contribute to their training?
Minister, I've got another 30 seconds with you. Do we need to change our financial model in this country? And Pradesh has asked that question. Do we need to relook at how we see the financial model of this country?
I don't know whether it's the financial model per se, but we need to relook the funding model in this country of what do we fund, how do we prioritize that? How do we use the money? For instance, if we have to go, like now there's the IMF drawing rights that are in. If we go and draw some money from the IMF, 50 billion or whatever the amount that we're allowed to draw, if we go and draw that amount, X amount from the IMF, how do we invest it into productive capital? But how do you use the enterprise development programs of private sector to match that amount so that it can go a long way, instead of being desperate in our approach, but we partner together. And partnering together meaning, if I have 1 rand, you bring another 1 rand, or Aspen, the employer of Stavros, brings another 1 rand, and we extend that 2 rands to make sure that we can at least reach 2 people, instead of us going to the same person all over again. So that model must change. But also, because there are funding pots that are sitting, we need to be very creative, even in the National Treasury, in government, in terms of our policy, but also in private sector, to say, how do we avail those funding envelopes on the key pots that are there for us to tap in, not necessarily government, but to contribute to the rebuilding, to make sure that women are included, who are majority of society, they're included in economic participation.
I think women and where women find ourselves in the country at the moment is one of the most dire situations we have. And I think that's a separate discussion altogether, and I'm very glad you touched on it, Minister. Minister, thank you very much for your time. Just in 30 seconds, what keeps you awake at night?
What keeps me awake is waking up 10 years later and having to explain myself to my children that I was a minister and did not make the impact that brought equality in South Africa, that made that a black child is equal in any respect to a white child in South Africa, that South Africa is an equal society. That's what keeps me awake at night.
Minister, bless you. We wish you luck. Please give the President our best regards. You certainly have a very, very tough portfolio. I don't wish to be in your place, but it seems to me that you understand what needs to be done. You have the support of the HIP Alliance and people that are on here. I think we all need to roll our sleeves out and realistically look at where we are in this country before we move forward in any way and address the inequality. Thank you, Minister. We wish you well, and please give the President our best wishes.
Thank you for having me, and I'll pass your regards. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
right, gentlemen, thank you very much, Minister. We've got so much to talk about here, and I'm just checking with all the speakers if you're okay to continue for another 20 or so minutes as we unpack what the Minister raised, what Stavros has raised, what Zev has raised, and looking at some of the questions. And I think that Elizabeth Sideropoulos, I don't know if we can open up Elizabeth Sideropoulos, because I'd love to bring Elizabeth into this particular conversation, bring Elizabeth in as a speaker, because I think that Elizabeth has a really valuable point to raise over here, and especially in the new role that she plays. So I'm not sure if our technical people can bring in Elizabeth Sideropoulos. We can't attach. Okay, can we then give Elizabeth the microphone to speak?
Oh, sorry, Aki, I'm going to have to go at about 15:15, if that's okay.
That's fine. Yes. I don't know if we can get Elizabeth Sideropoulos into this particular conversation. I'm looking at Craig. Is it possible to do that? No. Okay. All right. Well, Elizabeth has raised a very interesting issue. And she says that the Minister has raised a very important point regarding local employment in townships and the rise of the malls. We must rethink about creating skills with spaza owners. Some may even have seen a very insightful article in the Daily Maverick, and I'm going to publish Elizabeth's question. But yes, Craig, can we please send Elizabeth a login to sign in with the other account, please, because I really would like to bring in Elizabeth into this conversation. Elizabeth and I were at school together, and she has done incredible work, and at the moment she finds herself at the World Economic Forum and doing incredible work, and I think she really will add some really valuable insights to this particular conversation. But just before we go, I'd love okay, Elizabeth, do send me your email address in private. I will receive it, and then we'll send you the details. That's if you can make it. I'd love to see you and engage with you on this. So before you go, Zev, I know you've got 15 minutes or so. What is your take on what the Minister has said up to now?
Really, look, it's always hard to have the discussion once they've left. I do think it's...
Can you hear at least?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear.
I do think I mean, you know, I'm a big believer that you need to talk about the previous discrepancies, and I do think 25 years into democracy, it's more about the have and the have-nots. You know, for me, yes, I mean, as much as the corruptee and the corruptor are both unacceptable, I don't think it's a black and white issue. Excuse the pun. I think it's I think you need both, and I think you need to go after both as vigorously. And it does concern me that she tried to paint it as a white business issue versus a black government issue, which I don't believe is the case. I think today, I mean, you can just see with how many people in corporate and in private sector and in massive BE businesses, how the wealth has been brought much in line to blacks, whites, Indians and coloureds. And yeah, I think we as a country have actually done quite well. As some white South Africans will tell you, you can't get a job anymore. So I think a conversation does need to be having more on, there's two different perceptions. Your average white South African feels there's no future in the economy because of BE and all the hurdles he has to go through. And then what the minister says, what keeps her up at night, is that black kids will have the same opportunity as white kids, which I don't really see that. You know, when I see a kid, whether it is at a Saheti or at a Crawford, we're not seeing much colour. We're seeing the have and the have-nots. And I do think that's more of the bigger issue, which it's a pity she doesn't stay on, because I would have liked to have discussed it with her, that you know, the level of fear. And I mean, I know a lot of black South Africans who, you know, are now looking at immigrating after the unrest. I really don't believe it is. So I mean, maybe she felt just talking to the audience, because we are you know, because it was arranged by the HIP Alliance, and you've got a representative from the Jewish community, and we're all white, and we all do originally come from of European descent. But for me, South Africa is about the have and the have-nots, and I would like to have that further discussion. And I do believe, you know, Pick n Pay chose to go to the townships because it was actually going to help your average black South African who was put in the townships by the apartheid era. Pick n Pay didn't do it. And they've given up a lot to put a lot of their places into the townships, to make it more accessible, to make it cheaper than a lot of, let's say, spaza shops, because they have got the ability to buy better and stronger. And then the average person in the township who couldn't get, the only way could get to a retail store was going via the taxi rank in Johannesburg, could then much cheaply get very good cheap products, which had unbelievable quality assurance. So I do think that needs more debate. I feel that in South Africa we often miss each other, and yeah. I do believe the best way to talk is frank, openly, and honestly, and to discuss it. And yeah, those are my views.
Okay, Stavros, I'm going to bring you in this conversation now. I mean, the minister touched on so many things, touched on what you were talking as well about earlier. But before you tell us and unpack what the minister said, how does the HIP Alliance hope to encourage its members, and this is a question that's come into the audience, to implement sustainable triple BEE? That in light of some, it's really collapsing. It's not really happening. So does that need to happen? What does the HIP Alliance need to do? What role does the HIP Alliance need to play in this regard?
Okay, thanks very much. And I think on any platform like this, you're going to get a myriad of reactions, and unfortunately, we do live in a country that has a range of extremities attached to it, of course, and depending on which side of the extreme you sit, you're going to, of course, look at your own personal circumstances. And that's essentially the position you'll be taking. So I think for me, there's only really one answer here, is if we build a middle class, an inclusive middle class in this country, regardless of what policy you use to get there, I think that's got to be the starting point for all of us. So whilst we might lament our own situations in life, the only way to really get ahead here is you have to build an inclusive middle class. Now the question is, how do you get to that elusive middle class? And I think we started building that in the 90s. You know, that's when we had quite a robust growth. We averaged growth levels of around 3.9% for an uninterrupted decade. And then kind of the wheels came off after that. We ran 3 budget surpluses in the time of Trevor Manuel. What we would do to have a budget, even one budget surplus right now. Okay, so we can do this, but what we haven't translated all of this goodwill and all of the policies and all the rest of it, you can call it policy failures. We haven't translated this into an inclusive middle class, because if you get an inclusive middle class, you don't really care whether you're black or white or where you sit, because a middle class will provide opportunities for everyone, regardless if you're black or white. Now, the question we should be asking is, if the economic model has failed, what do we need to do? And I know some people on this platform are saying there are no ideas coming through. And so let's just try and tackle some of the ideas. How do we get to that middle class? I think the first thing we've got to realize here is that government is an enabler, and the private sector is the entity that comes in and creates the economic opportunities, the jobs, etc. And I'm afraid that we've placed too much reliance on the government to create those jobs. And we haven't been as forceful as we should around the policy failures, I believe. So I think we need to tackle those policy failures up front. We need to be clear that government's an enabler, the private sector is the economic, creates the economic opportunities. And for me, there are 3 fundamental things we need to do here. Okay. So let's go through what, if we had to put a basic 3-point plan together. I think the first thing is we need to accelerate the structural reforms that we've spoken about. So things like making your ports, your logistic systems more efficient. Things like stimulating entrepreneurship by rather spending some of your higher and basic education budget on creating entrepreneurs, rather than creating graduates that come out of universities that need to be trained all over again. I mean, that's a terrible, it's an inefficient use of funding. There are many other areas in government where there are inefficient uses of funding. I'm just citing one example, because how have economies that have been in a similar situation to ours, we're not unique. There are many post-World War II economies that were able to go on this upward trajectory and have been on the up ever since. So these are some of the structural reforms when we talk about those. Now, I believe that President Ramaphosa has started some of those structural reforms. They haven't been quick enough, swift enough, and I think we know some of the reasons. So I think as a society, we need to assist to accelerate those structural reforms. So that's point number 1, Aki. Point number 2 is around our fiscal discipline, and that's at a macroeconomic level. So fiscally, we're not operating efficiently. There's as I said, a misallocation of budgets. We're managing our finances very poorly, and we need to rethink that piece as well. So if this were a business, if SA Inc. were a business, right now we would be underperforming at a sales level and also overspending. And you cannot sustain that in any business. Either you've got to shut down the branches and grow the sales, or you've got to cut down your expenses. You cannot have bloated expenses and declining sales. And so the fiscal position of the country needs to be looked at. And then my last point, Aki, is I'm going to talk about the catalyst of these 2 things, right? And the catalyst for me is social cohesion. You cannot have a society that is socially incohesive, because then it's at each other's throats. So if you to implement some of these structural reforms, including localization, by the way. I could go on endlessly tonight about localization, because that creates up and downstream opportunities. The minister did allude to those, and maybe we need a separate webinar with Minister Patel just on that alone, because up and downstream opportunities are amongst the biggest multipliers into the economy. So those are the 3 points that I would focus on, Aki.
Okay. Look, I think one of the key drivers of rebooting this economy is getting back on track and opening ourselves up to tourism and just getting out from where we are. As one of the people who's really actively involved in the vaccine in the country, which is really going to be instrumental in getting us back to where we should be, is it realistic to say that by November we could have maybe 50% of the population vaccinated? Is that a realistic goal, Stavros?
So, okay, first of all, we need to vaccinate approximately 40 million South Africans to achieve a promised land of herd immunity. Okay?
Yes.
Now, I'm very pleased that there are a number of South African Greeks on this call, because what this comes down to is we are currently chasing variants. Now, you'll know that these variants are named after the Greek symbols in the alphabet. Fortunately, there are only 24 letters in the alphabet, and we're at lambda at the moment. We cannot afford to go down to omega, because every time there's a new variant, you then start, it's like a diversion in your business. So you're keeping your eye on the sales, and then you get diverted and your sales decline again. So I'm using that example. Right. So what we need to do is we need to vaccinate 40 million South Africans in order to give us a chance to achieve herd immunity, which will reduce the number of variants. And what it will do is it will allow us to open up the economy. So where are we at the moment? We just under 8 million doses have been administered. We're at the end of July, let's say. Okay. We can increase our capacity to between 3 and 350,000 vaccines a day, up from the current 240,000 odd. We can do that in the short term. Short term is in the next 3 to 4 weeks. Okay. We can then, at that pace, Aki, we can vaccinate up to 70% of the desired 40 million by the end of the year. What's the importance of that? The importance is that we would vaccinate significant swathes of the population before the much dreaded and anticipated next wave, which is the fourth wave. And the best way to manage these waves is vaccinate as many people as possible. So my last comment, Aki, is, in fact, I want to make 2 final comments. In those countries like the UK, where you're getting significant number of reinfections on the vaccinated population, wish I could show you the graph. The death rates are next to nothing, and that's what you're trying to avoid. It's not that you won't get infected or reinfected. What you're trying to avoid here is severe disease and death, and open up the economy. And my final comment is that the best return on investment that you can make right now as a country is to encourage your population to be vaccinated, including those people that are vaccine hesitant. We need to get those people on side and demonstrate the benefits, the societal benefits of being vaccinated, not least of which is restoring our livelihoods and opening up our economies again.
Okay, thank you, Stavros. So, yeah, interesting. Interesting. What about mandatory vaccines in private businesses? Now, this is a very, very controversial topic, and I know that some organizations, you look at the likes of Apple and the likes of Facebook and Google, and in fact, I was looking at this afternoon in New York, they were saying that restaurants are going to require people to show them that they have a Uber as well. Somebody's pointed out to me that you will have to, show your certificate that you've been vaccinated in order to be allowed into a restaurant. We know what the situation in France is like. And I'd love to hear from Craig and yourself, Stavros, is that do you support the mandatory vaccination of everyone, depending on which sphere of work you are in at the moment?
Okay, look, let me start off by saying that we have to, in responding to all of these issues, we have to understand our constitutional rights as citizens. I mean, that's really the starting point. And there's nothing in the Constitution right now that would impose a mandatory vaccination program. Okay. So that's at a constitutional level, if you want to look at the question legally. Right? Let's rather look at the question in a more practical sense. So we know, and it's been proven without any dispute right now, that those economies that have vaccinated significant parts of their population, the mortality rates have come down precipitously, but like really precipitously. The graphs are quite amazing to see. I wish I could put them up, and I'm sure many of you have seen them. So our starting point should be, do vaccines prevent severe disease and death, and do they open up economies? And the answer is yes, they do. You then have to look at this as an individual in society, because you've got the individual and then you've got society. So if you don't get vaccinated and you encourage big parts of society not to be vaccinated, you're never going to get to herd immunity, and you're never going to reduce the mortality rates that we want to achieve in this country, the reduced mortality rates. So in effect, if you are not vaccinating yourself, you are placing a hazard on society. And that's just unfortunately the way it is. So this concept of we're only safe individually when we're all safe can never ring more true than in the case of vaccines. And finally, Aki, I think a lot of people have said, well, I never want to take a vaccine because I've never taken one in my life. But I mean, we all know that in our pediatric years, we all get given these vaccines, and we get given these vaccines for good reason, because there's no better investment, public health or otherwise, than vaccines. So I think in answering the question, okay, I think we need to look at those dynamics. This is exactly the slide. I don't know who's put it up. Is it you, Sanile? Okay, let's just look at the slide. So the red graph is the United Kingdom before they introduced their vaccine campaign. On the left of the graph, so my left, in other words, I'm still looking at the red curve, is the number of cases per 100,000 in the United Kingdom. So these were the number of people infected by age category. So you can see there's a category, the last category is 50 and upwards. And then on the opposite side, you can see the death rate.
Hello?
Death rates are very high.
Okay.
Death rate in wave 2. Let's look at wave 3 for a moment. Now, wave 3 in the United Kingdom is when they vaccinated around 50% of their population. So you still get a lot of infections coming through. That's on my left. I'm looking at the grey curve, the grey graph. And then have a look at the death rate, which is on the right-hand side, the opposite side. So 2,1 for every, deaths per 10 million population. And have a look at the red curve in contrast, 35.6. So this is one of the benefits of compelling evidence, how effective these vaccines are. And that's how, in answering the question, Aki, that's what we should be considering.
I think I've managed to technologically get Elizabeth Sideropoulos on the line. Elizabeth, I'm not sure if you can hear us.
Yes, I can, Aki. Hi.
Give me 1 second, gentlemen. Liz, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, we can hear you, Elizabeth. Thank you very much. I'm doing something technologically that, anyway, I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing. But Elizabeth, I'm sorry we couldn't get you over video, but I really value your input in this conversation, because I think that so many issues have been cover today, but you are the Chief Executive of the South African Institute of International Affairs. With a backdrop of what's happened, where our country finds ourselves in, with what you've heard tonight, what is your take on where Team South Africa is? Where are we as a country, and what do we need to do as a country to move forward out of this economic ditch that we've all fallen into?
Well, I think the discussion has really thrown up a number of really rich ideas, and I think all of us know what the solutions are. It's always very difficult, however, to will have a stable economy, a stable polity, and so on. I think maybe just a couple of observations linked to what both the Minister has said and I think others. I think the issue of entrepreneurship is very, very critical. The Minister quoted a figure of 10%. I think she said 10% of entrepreneurs or self-employment in South Africa compared to other countries, particularly emerging countries that have higher rates. That is actually a figure that comes out of, I think, the most recent World Bank report that was published a couple of weeks ago and a couple of months ago. And that really speaks directly to the fact that compared to other emerging economies, South Africa's entrepreneurial flair is very, very limited. And that is something that I think, if we're thinking as a hip community, some of the ideas that the Minister has put out there, and I think maybe we need to put our heads together around what we should be doing with the Small Business Summit. I think there are opportunities there about for us to actually make a very concrete, direct contribution in an area where I think most of us, certainly not me, but most of the Greek community and others are actually very, have been really among the top achievers in South Africa. I think there is another dimension in terms of, I think a lot of the points that have been raised about where South Africa has done well and where not, particularly also in the vaccine rollout. With my hat, with my international relations hat, I just want to say that we were, colleagues and I were involved in sort of working on a chapter on how South Africa had engaged in its international strategy with regard to COVID, and in that regard, had also spoken to Stavros a little bit, and certainly over the course of the last year, with South Africa's chairing of the African Union, I think we did a really good job of mobilizing Africa to take African issues to the world, specifically around debt, specifically about vaccine procurement. And really mobilizing and creating a greater awareness about some of the challenges that Africa faces, but also the fact that we can do much more collectively than we can as individual countries. And I think that's a lesson that we can take back to the context, to the domestic South African context. It's about working together between the private sector and the public sector. And I think there are some concrete ideas that perhaps we need to really brainstorm over the course of the next while and actually see what we can bring to the table.
Elizabeth, you're the Chief Executive of the South African Institute of International Affairs. How does the rest of the world see South Africa? With the backdrop of what has happened in the last month, for example, and our downward spiral economically, there are shoots of optimism. So this is where you play as the Chief Executive of the South African Institute of International Affairs. How does the rest of the world see South Africa? Are they optimistic? Are we too pessimistic as South Africans?
So I think what has happened in the last couple of weeks has, we've had to take a knock in terms of how certainly the way in which the various international media covered and analysed what had happened. I think in some parts of the world, specifically, for example, our BRICS partners, if you look at some of the headlines coming out of, say, China, Global Times, or stories coming out of India, real concern about not citizens, because of course they're not citizens. We're talking about our Indian fellow South Africans, but concern about what was happening in Phoenix. I mean, there was a lot of that narrative in the media, certainly in the developing world, and then I think all of us have seen, the articles in the Financial Times or the Washington Post or the New York Times or the New Yorker, which really highlight some of the more concerning elements of what we saw over the last couple of weeks. I think the real challenge, and I think everybody spoke about, we're a resilient society. Indeed, we do. Sometimes you wish, okay, resilience is enough, and we move on to the next phase. But I think there were a couple of really important points that came out of the last month. The first is reiterating what Stavros said, the importance of the rule of law and the fact that the rule of law is sacrosanct, that we actually are living in a constitutional democracy. Constitutional democracies are flawed. They do have challenges. The value of a constitutional democracy is how we come back. Okay? Everybody messes up. The question is, how do we come back? And I think democracies should have the mechanisms and help to build up institutions so that we can come back better. I think the proof is going to be in the pudding of how we both roll out the recovery, how we deal with some of these political problems. Because at the end of the day, our ability to lead in Africa and our ability to be, I think, an important global player depends on whether we have our own house in order. So whether we are able to change the narrative overseas or to reinforce, I think, the better narratives that have come out of South Africa will really depend on short term how we deal with some of the political and economic challenges, and longer term really how we come to grips with the huge economic structural issues that we have been dealing with for so long.
How close do you think we came to the edge of the precipice last month?
Yeah, it's always, so when you're in the middle of it, it looks pretty, I think it was pretty dire. When you're actually in the middle of it and you're all consumed both by the media and what you hear from colleagues and friends and whatever. And certainly at the Institute, we had cases where people had been really seriously affected and we had to make a plan to help them. So that looked, and the fact that it continued for several days and we really battled to sort of get it under control initially, I think was really, really disturbing for all of us. I think it was traumatic coming on the back of COVID. But I think things have now returned to normality, and I hope that this is a significant wake-up call for how close we can be, or how the tensions are so very close to the surface, how the friction is so close to the surface. So we don't want to experience that again.
Liz, always good to chat to you. Lovely to hear your voice again. Thank you very much for coming into the conversation, albeit in a very strange way. I'm holding my phone. I've got you over WhatsApp, and I'm on a Teams call as well with all the other people. But thank you so much, Elizabeth Sideropoulos, for joining us and sharing your insights as you represent your particular organization, which is, of course, the CEO of the chief executive of the South African Institute of International Affairs. Liz, thank you so much.
Thanks, Aki.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Stavros, there we go. Okay, so we used different kinds of technology, but just to come back to, and I know that we are way over time tonight, but it's an interesting discussion. But just coming back to what you said about the vaccines, and somebody sent me over WhatsApp to say that what about kids who go to school and you got to get vaccinated in schools to be accepted in schools? So how is the COVID vaccine any different?
So, I think firstly, it was really a great pleasure listening to Liz as well. Let me say that I always value her inputs. And I think that must have been a golden year when you and Liz were at school together.
Well, Liz's academic situation really pushed up the average, so that tells you a lot about my academic side of things in matric. So let's leave it at that.
Okay, well, I guess some might argue that you got the looks and the intellect, so we will leave it at that. Okay, to answer your question, look, firstly, vaccination programs for children and toddlers are not unusual, as I said earlier. In fact, some of the biggest gains in both longevity and public health outcomes have been as a consequence of pediatric vaccinations. In fact, if you look at how the mortality rates in children on the continent have diminished since we started giving pneumococcal vaccines and vaccines against the rotavirus, these have had a dramatic effect. And as we speak right now, there is cohort testing that is taking place by 2 of the mRNA-based vaccines. As far as I know, there might be others that are looking at a cohort of children being vaccinated. So these vaccines are being tested in the younger age bands, and it would not surprise me, and it's a good public health outcome if you vaccinate your toddlers and pediatrics in time. Of course, you've got to test the safety always, these vaccines, which is happening. But the point I wanted to make is that measles, mumps, rubella, pertussis, all of these things that were often a death sentence decades ago are now vaccines administered to children. And you don't really, measles is highly contagious. It's even more contagious than the Delta variant.
Well, look at the eradication of polio. I mean, that's a great example of a success story of vaccines. Stavros, thank you very, very much. Yeah, it's been an interesting discussion. I think we should be having more of these discussions. I mean, there's a lot of uncomfortable conversations that need to be held. Let me just ask you just to wrap up in 30 seconds, and then I'm going to go to John Balavakis, who's going to say the final thank yous. And thank you to everybody who has been really amazing in contributing to the conversation. Some of the questions have been brutal, and I think that they have to be brutal. We have to ask tough questions in this country. I do believe the minister didn't address some of the root causes adequately enough. She did not satisfy me, and I think we all have questions with how the government has acted over the last 27 years and the role that they've played when you look at corruption and how many people are in jail at the moment. So the people are angry out there, but I don't believe all is lost, and I believe that the president has the right, the right focus in getting this country back on track. So Stavros, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, okay, I know we have run out of time, so I'm going to make 3 very brief closing remarks. I think the first is that the uncertainty and to some degree the melancholic that people are feeling right now is not unique only to our country. I mean, as recently as 5 days ago, my kids were both in Athens on a return trip back to South Africa, and guess what happened? That I was expecting them to call, they didn't call. Why? Because the train station at Piraeus had been burnt down. So they caught a ferry from one of the islands into Piraeus. They were delayed while the train station had been burnt down. They had been rioting in Athens, right? Now, this uncertainty is not unique, as I said. What is unique to our country, though, is the inequality and the widening Gini coefficient that we speak about. But I think therein, let me get to my second point. Therein lies some of the silver lining of what we saw 2 or 3 weeks ago. Yes, it was the boiling pot spilled over. There's no doubt. But I think it's also allowed us as a society to start reflecting on a different way of doing things. And on reflection, I think that some of the bold steps that the president is taking, albeit that many people feel he's acting too slowly. But when you start seeing, there are not too many countries around the world, including the United States, by the way, where you'll see a former president sitting in incarcerated at the moment. There are not many democracies, I think, where that would have happened. And you can go through France, you can go through many, what many people consider to be more advanced economies, more democratic, and all the rest of it. I think that what we are seeing is democracy in action. We are seeing the upholding of the rule of law. And these are all the things that investors look at. And any economic recovery always starts with confidence. There's no confidence in the economy, then you're not going to restart or rekindle any economy. So that's the second of the 3 points I want to make, Aki, is that I think there are green shoots. There are silver linings that we can take from the events of 2 or 3 weeks ago. Let me move to my final point. And my final point really speaks to the benefits of these type of engagements. As with anything in life, including vaccines, we can sit and you get your armchair critics. There are people that will, no matter what solution you put on the table, they will criticize it. They will say there's no idea, there's no hope. Right? Or you can take the other view, which is, yes, there are immense problems. There have been for some time. We've been let down. But you know what? I'm going to roll up my sleeves and try and make a difference, because armchair critics get you nowhere in life. All they do is they perpetuate the problem. And we've had some of those on this call this evening. Okay, but what this does, these type of conversations, what they allow us to do is they allow us to reflect on the issues. They allow us to bring society closer together, because a socially incohesive society is a recipe for disaster anywhere. And if there is anything that we can take off this call this evening, is that A, we need further engagement, B, we need less armchair critics, and C, we need to redouble our efforts at building a more socially cohesive and a more socially integrated society. And I believe South Africa has done that in the past, and we can do it again. Let's use the events of 3 weeks ago, things like tonight, in a very small way, to rekindle hope in the future again. But thanks very much, Aki. You've been a splendid moderator and host. Thanks to the HIP Alliance for putting this together, and maybe be many more of these type of discussions that take us forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Let me bring in John into the conversation as well. John, are you still with us?
Yes,
I can see you. There we go. All right, there we go. Thank you very much, John. You started off, and now you're going to end. John Balavas.
Yes. Thank you very much, everyone, to everyone that attended. Really appreciate the time. I know we ran over. I know it's been hectic. In a way, I'm very happy that it was actually that hectic, because HIP's role is to bring our government and our communities together. And for me, that's what happened here tonight. And it's our role to encourage dialogue, and there must be a way for us to do that. And this webinar, in a small bit, just like Dr. Nicolaou just said to us, is part of getting that dialogue across. So for me, I'm pretty happy that today went as hectic as it did. I think we could have run it a little bit smoother, and we'll try to do that next time. I need to just say a couple of thank yous. First of all, to Dr. Nicolaou, thank you very much. To Aki, wonderful. Thank you very, very much. So much energy coming through. Thank you very much. To Zev, a very good friend of our community. Thank you for bringing the Jewish community closer to our communities. It's very much appreciated. To Elizabeth, thanks for dialing in. We really appreciate that. To the technical guys behind the scenes, thanks for all the work that you've done. And I know it's been crazy tonight. I just need to make a couple of acknowledgements. I want to acknowledge the of people that have been in attendance during the webinar. And I know it's a bit late. I didn't realize we were going to be so short on time. But I want to acknowledge His Excellency, the Shazaido Affairs of the Hellenic Republic, Mr. Ioannidis, His Eminence, the Archbishop Serafim Kikotis, who did dial in, the president of the Cypriot Brotherhood of South Africa, and he's also represented as the International Cypriot Community Structures Deputy President, Mr. Andrea Dimitriou. The president and the board of the Federation of Hellenic Communities of South Africa, Mr. Spiridis. Our beloved clergy, our Father Athos, Father Gerasimo, Father Ephraim, Father Basil, and Father Georgios. The leaders of our HIC community structures and associations, our youth, very important in our lives, and the leaders of the HIP community youth structures, and attendees from the Minister's Office. Thank you very much for attending. It was great. I know a lot of the questions weren't answered, but it is a start in our dialogue, and we need to continue these conversations because they are difficult conversations, but we need to have them. Aki, thank you very, very much to everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
We're all very optimistic, and I think that we live in a beautiful country. There's no doubt about it. Let's make it happen. And please get vaccinated. It will save your life. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.